to look at some issues with the Southwest LRT project, particularly an issue of water resources and another issue of looking at our freight rail to see if there are any other viable alternatives. And so that's the process we've been going through for the last 60 days. So we have two experts here with us, and I'm going to invite them up first. I'll invite up Burns and McDonald. We have Della Young and Jeff Thuma from Burns and McDonald, who will go over that report with you. And then when they are done, I'm going to invite up Jim Terry, who was the expert who was hired to do the freight rail analysis. Both of them are independent experts. Both of them have been working independently. Their work has not been directed by the Met Council project staff. And this is the first time the technical experts from the cities and the county and the council are getting the information, as well as the policymakers today. So come on up, and I'll let you present the report. And I will step aside while you're doing that.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Della Young, and this is Jeff Thuma, who's on my team, who served as the hydrogeologist and expert. Yes?
Could you spell your names on both, please?
Della, D-E-L-L-A, Young, Y-O-U-N-G, and it's Jeff, J-E-F-F, and the last name Thuma, T-H-U-M-A. Burns and McDonald. And Burns and McDonald was hired to do an independent technical analysis of the water resources around the shallow LRT tunnel option. With that, we gathered quite a bit of information. We participated in meetings, specifically town hall meetings, and in that, from the town hall meetings, we drew from that a few things that were important: dewatering, potential issues with contamination, design storm related issues, as well as whether or not the design was going to, apologies, my notes are all over the place, and whether or not the design was going to take into account the water level changes. So we were given 6 reports to review. And we took a look at those reports, and we really looked at them specifically, identifying each of the statements that were made in there and whether or not they had enough supporting detail in them. Then we went through and also incorporated the information from the town hall meetings and what was required. We were looking at a few things: the impacts to groundwater level, whether or not the water budget for the chain of lakes was going to change, the groundwater flow between the lakes, as well as the leakage rates that were proposed for the tunnel itself, the construction and operation methods, and then whether or not the infiltration chamber that are proposed are going to be able to deal with warm water issues in the winter, and if there were any other impacts that we could see. One thing that's important to note with this construction project, or this proposed construction project, they are looking at putting in sheet pile walls to isolate groundwater from coming into the tunnels. They're going to put a concrete base on it and really close it off into a contained box. And what's going to happen with that is there's a set amount of water that's in there that would need to be removed. Now, this is not an active dewatering situation. It's not like the 1800 West Lake Street situation where you have active dewatering where the water level is being lowered with water being pumped out. That is not the same situation as being proposed here. With the project as it moves, into looking at the operation phase, there are a few systems that are put in place to address water. One, the precipitation that's going to come in, rainwater, snow melt that's going to come in and go into the tunnels. There's a system there to pick up that water right before it goes into the tunnels. The next drainage system that's a part of the project is there's this internal wall. So should water seep in through the sheet pile or through the bottom, there are pipes in place to be able to take that water out. And then the third thing is, if water happens to get in through, it gets past the entrance and gets into the tunnel, or it seeps in, there's another control method that's going to pick up that water and put it through the sanitary sewer system. So as we looked at what we had here, we did let me get to my page. We looked at the impact of the proposed project on groundwater levels. First of all, we looked at the hydrogeology of the system. We found that there's, deposits of sand and gravel. There are some places where there's a berry swamp deposit, some man-made material, but underlain there is a thick, coarse sand aquifer. One thing that we recommended as you look at this, the wells and the monitoring stations are running along the proposed track. What we're recommending here to get a really full understanding of what's happening with groundwater here is to put some more wells, some more monitoring stations between the lakes so that you can get a clearer picture of what's going on with groundwater. The next thing would be the leakage and the pumping rates. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is not an active dewatering situation. It is an isolated, where the tunnel has been isolated with the walls. So we did not see that there were any potential problems with leakage or pumping, as long as the leakage rates are not exceeded that are in the basis of design report. But one thing we did recommend, and we are recommending, is that dewatering, the term, be removed from the basis of design report, because this is not active dewatering where you're lowering the water level at all. There was a question about blockage of groundwater flow. With the coarse sand aquifer, with the proposed tunnel, the assumption is that the water should be able to get in through under the tunnel. However, again, like we talked about before, there needs to be additional monitoring along the system to fully categorize what's happening with groundwater. As it relates to the chain of lakes and the water budget, the only water that's actually going to be leaving the system, because all the water that falls on the project goes either in infiltration basins to groundwater or to stormwater. The only water that's actually going to disappear from the system is what's going to go to the sanitary sewer, that water that ends up in the tunnel. And for that, it's going to be a very small amount and should not significantly impact the water budget. However, sanitary sewer systems, storm sewer systems, they're all designed to carry a certain design and carry certain flow. If you're adding anything to it, you want to do a comprehensive analysis to figure out if it can handle it for your project. Potential to impact groundwater flow between the lakes. Right now, as we see it, the lakes are equal, with the channel in the middle. There are no hydraulic drivers that would block flow between the lakes. Again, that needs to be further characterized with the additional monitoring information. With the leakage rates, with that one, we felt that the project adequately addressed that. There are some recommendations to revise the calculations in the report and to really state assumptions and input values. Reasonability of stormwater, the infiltration design. As I mentioned, there are drains that are put in place to be able to capture the water. In the wintertime, the primary water that we're going to see is going to be the groundwater that may come in through the bottom or through the sheet pile walls. Snow melt will be captured with that first drain. So the primary issue there is the chamber, and the chamber takes the water and it goes down to groundwater. So it's going to go to that water temperature. It's not going to be discharged directly into the lake to impact the temperature of the lake. So we feel that adequately addresses the concern. We do have a couple of recommendations. During the summertime and when you have higher rainfall events, you want to make sure that there are some pre-treatment devices in front of the, before the chambers, the infiltration chambers, to take out any grit or oils or anything that could clog up the chamber and make it ineffective. Also, the chamber is currently designed for a smaller rainfall event, like a 50-year. The difference between the 50-year and the 100-year is statistically insignificant and should just be bumped up to the 100-year design. Lastly, any other potential impacts? When looking at this system, and we are in Minnesota, and today there was snow, and there will be snow. As you look at, as the project looks at evaluating how to clean snow, one issue that should be looked at is chlorides. If you're salting, it may get into the system and could contaminate groundwater. The other thing is a phase 1 environmental site assessment was done for this project. In that, there were some high-risk areas, and those areas need to be further investigated with a phase 2, which is the next step. So with that, our recommendations would be to investigate other snow and ice removal, as well as to conduct a phase 2. Lastly, on the water resources monitoring plan, it is preliminary, and there needs to be, as you move to the next level, there needs to be more detail in terms of specific site locations, parameters, and other thresholds that will be addressed. And that concludes it. Again, this is a draft, and we are open to comments to address them.
Thank you, Della. I appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, I think I'll just wait a minute and let Jim give his presentation. And before I introduce Jim, I just wanted to stress that these reports are draft reports. They are going to be posted on our website, which they are today. We are looking forward to getting comments from citizens in the community about these draft reports, as well as the analysis by all of our technical partners as we look at this. And in fact, we will have public presentations about these reports next week to the Citizens Advisory Committee and Business Advisory Committee, and then the Corridor Management Committee. And then we have a couple of town hall forums that are scheduled for February 10th and 12th. And so citizens will get a chance to come and provide their responses to these draft reports before they will be a final report. So I'm going to invite up Jim Terry, who's with Trans Systems, and he is the person who is looking at the freight rail relocation alternatives. Thanks, Jim.
All right, my name is Jim Terry, J-I-M, last name Terry, T-E-R-R-Y. I am with Trans Systems. Let me spell that for you. T-R-A-N-S-Y-S-T-E-M-S. Obviously, if you want some more propaganda about the company, put a .com behind that, and we'll amaze you with some of our websites. 850 employees in the company. We're based out of Kansas City, 40 offices around the nation. Of that 850, about 350 are engineers. 160 of those have worked in the rail industry, have real railroad experience, and I think that's why the Met Council asked Trans Systems to take a look at just the freight rail alternatives and to go back and look at the work that had been done, various studies over the time, and take one more look, clean sheet of paper type situation, and give a outside view of what was going on, all of the options that might have been available, that are still available, and to proceed in that direction. And that's basically what we did. We've been working on this for 2 months. We initially began, as we said, reviewing studies that had been done by others, and there certainly was quite a number of those. Gleaned a lot of information from those particular studies. Then we attended a couple of town hall meetings, one in the Kenilworth area, one in Minneapolis, one in the St. Louis Park area, and there was a huge wealth of information obtained in those particular meetings. Like I said, I am from Kansas City, and when we have a public meeting in Kansas City, if we have 200 people show up, it's unusual. Well, I understand they turned more than that away at the last meeting, so the citizens' participation is outstanding in this area, and you guys are all to be congratulated for your involvement. Get to the subject at hand. We looked at approximately 9 options that had been covered in these studies over the past. Some of them might have been good options once upon a time, but times have changed. As an example, there was an option between Hopkins and the BNSF route. The US 169 is on right now, so it becomes a little improbable to move US 169 to put a freight rail over there. So that one was not looked into too great a detail. There were a couple of options in the western portion of the state where the Twin City and Western Railroad, which is one of the railroads that are involved in this, has some connections with the Burlington Northern Railroad, and the thought was given, would it make some sense to divert the trains out there on the west side of the state of Minneapolis, and the west side being in the Appleton area or the Granite Falls area. And basically what that did, it applied economic pressure so that the railroad became much less inefficient. It was hauling the cars, depending on which route you were using, 100 to 200 miles out of route, increasing the cost dramatically. So that was just looked at as commercially non-viable, and it certainly didn't keep the railroads competitive. The last thing you need in the state of Minnesota is another 100,000 trucks on your highway. So we looked at a couple of other routes that were partially intact, but again, there was a Shasta cutoff that was mentioned, and you'll see that in the handout. 12 miles of that has been abandoned, property reverted. People have built homes on it, businesses on it. The river bridge crossing has been removed. And then when you get on the south side of the river, you need to have Union Pacific's permission for the Twin City and Western to run over their railroad into the St. Paul, Minneapolis area. And it lengthened out some of the interchanges there. So that became one that we set by the wayside for a number of reasons and fatal flaws in it. We also looked at the Midtown corridor. Now, keep in mind that I'm looking at this, or my team is looking at this from a freight rail perspective. So what I say has no bearing on streetcars in the future or light rail in the future, just freight rail. Used to be the way freight rail could run in this area, but those times have changed. As you know, Highway 55 was enlarged, and also the Hiawatha line of the light rail was created, and that line's elevated, making the ability to put a structure over that whole area quite daunting and frankly quite expensive. You also have the issues that the, quote, trench that the line is in is not deep enough for today's rail standards. A number of overhead bridges that would have to be replaced. Parkland, I mean, there are just a number of things that made that route not friendly for freight railroad. Again, not to say anything about the streetcars or the light rail. We looked at, there are 4 routes left. One is the Kenilworth. Obviously, it works for freight rail today, so it's a viable freight rail route. We looked at connections in St. Louis Park. There were 3 different routes that are involved in that. One was the possibility of turning south out of St. Louis Park down the old, I believe you call it the Dan Patch line here in town. It's the MN&S Railroad, which the Canadian Pacific actually owns. And that route runs about 12 miles down to Savage, and crosses the river on a swing span bridge that's frankly in need of some work, and meets up with the Union Pacific's Mankato sub just south of the river. A lot of problems, a lot of issues in that, but we did look at that one very deeply to see if we could make that work also. I'm going to hold off my predictions on that one to the kind of the end. We looked at the M&S North route. Did a lot of work on some of the studies that had been done before. There's some engineering challenges in those studies, I'll be quite honest with you, making it difficult for freight rail to operate. So we took notes at the 2 town hall meetings and went back with my team, and I said, let's get a clean sheet of paper out. There's something wrong with everything that we've tried so far, and let's see if we can kind of address some of these problems if possible. Knowing we're not going to solve them all, but let's see what we can do. We have come up with an alternative, and that alternative does still use a majority of the existing CP line in St. Louis Park. It still is the same line that runs by the school. That issue was not solved. It's still by the school. There are some safety enhancements that we'll propose to certainly help that situation. But basically, we improved the grades by lessening them. Freight train just can't make some of the grades that the highways can make, some of the curves that the highways make, so there are limits. There are railroad standards, and we've engineered to those particular standards. Tried to minimally affect businesses, tried to minimally affect the community as a whole, offering some suggestions, offering some improvements to the safety in the area, keeping that in mind that we're dealing with the citizens who are used to seeing 2 trains a day, and on a good day those trains carry 15 cars, to where in the future they could have 5 or 6 trains added in a 24-hour period, some of them of which have 110, 115 cars. So we kept all of that in mind. One of the fourth option that we looked at was what is called the UTU option, the United Transportation Union. They had some good suggestions, quite frankly. We looked at those. What that route does, it is based on the M&S North route, but instead of connecting with the BNSF Railroad, it continues further north and circles back, adds about 3.5 miles to the route, and comes back in just west of Target Field. It's a good option if something, the BNSF route should fail to materialize for some reason, but that's a good one to put in the back of our pocket. But let me emphasize, you got to solve the problems of St. Louis Park before that one becomes a viable route. The MNS South route, with connection with the Union Pacific, we again looked at the safety issues there. The number of vehicles crossing those road crossings down there are very huge. There were 15 road crossings.
I'm going to ask you to move it on, so I know we probably have a few
I'm
questions.
going to move on, guys, ladies. Anyway, what we've done, we eliminated the M&S here south at the last minute, got the UTU kind of off to the side. We feel like you've got 2 viable corridors here in the area. One is the M&S North through St. Louis Park, and the other route is the Kenilworth. Again, we looked at freight rail. Having moved on now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Just wanted to bring Della back up and see if anyone had any questions for either of the 2 experts.
So does this, the MNS North Trans Systems concept, eliminate the big berms that were one of the big problems with the previous idea?
Yes, sir.
How does it do that?
we started all the way back and readjusted the grades, relocated where we would cross Highway 7. We come down at Library Lane. We hit the existing grade there at Library Lane. While I said we haven't solved the school's problem per se, we are on the existing route as we go past the schools and by McDonald's. We level off the railroad between Woodle Street and the Minnetonka overpass, and then we take that elevation and we run that off smoothly into the BNSF interchange down at the bottom of the hill.
Is this option, which option is cheaper? Keeping the trains in Kenilworth or this alternative?
That's something that I think Metcalf is the next step in this process, is to take the work we've done, because I don't know what the costs are in the Kenilworth, so I better let the chair.
The next step will be to take the work that Jim has done, and, our next step will be to take the work that has been done by both of the consultants, review it with our technical staff, look at the cost estimates, make sure we're using apples and apples as we're looking at costs, that we are doing the same methodology as we have up to this point in the project budget. This is a good step forward. We want to be able to make a project budget decision and a final project budget scope later this spring. And I think these two reports provide a lot of good information for the council, for all of the cities along this line. And so I think it's a good first step, but we have a lot of people to hear from, and it's a very complex. These reports are pretty complex.
Does later this spring mean April, May? What?
Well,
you're talking about a Met Council decision as to what to do.
At this point, we have one planned for the end of March.
Okay.
Does any of this potentially jeopardize federal funding, applying for federal funding?
No, these reports were done within the context of the schedule that we're proposing to stay on track with the original schedule here.
Since we're talking about funding, I see the Senate Transportation Chair back here. What's the
You'll have to ask him.
So how do you intend to move forward with trying to secure the rest of the state funding? And is this something that you need to get passed in 2014?
But we already have a significant state share allocated for this project. We need some additional state share. Our first hope, of course, is that we're going to have a dedicated sales tax pass for transit. That would be the first choice. Right, Senator? Already passed in the Senate, proposed by the governor. And also, I think I see support from Representative Hornstein back there. And then we're working with our partners to see if there's an interim solution in the event that transit sales tax doesn't get passed this session.
You were meeting with public officials from Minneapolis, and I assume St. Louis Park as well today. Mm-hmm. Did the St. Louis Park officials seem amenable to this reopening the idea of running trains?
Well, I think all of the officials are really waiting to, really read the reports, go over it with their staffs, and make a decision about what further questions they want to see answered here. And I wouldn't want to speak for either Minneapolis or St. Louis Park in this instance.
Mr. Terry, can you just step forward for a second, and then if the M&S North route, what does this do to the Kenilworth corridor area?
Frees it of freight traffic, of freight railroad traffic.
Gone.
Yeah.
And Jim, your team came up with this all on their own? Is that what you're describing? Blank sheet of paper?
My team does this all the time, different projects.
But
It's the first time
it
we've
was
done
not one of
this
the
area.
options that you reviewed.
Oh, we built off of those options. In other words, you don't do anything in a vacuum. We looked at the best railroad grades available. Actually, it was one of the projects that was mentioned with the high berms, so we wanted to get close to that, but without the high berms, and eliminating that type of stuff, which means we had to kind of slide things back. So,
How high will the elevation be in St. Louis Park?
all right, well, let's, as we're talking about, you got to be high enough to get over Highway 7. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, well,
Oh.
there was a 200-foot berm before that was, yeah.
There's no berm. If you're familiar with St. Louis Park, when you come across Highway 7, you're back on the ground at Library Lane, and as you go by the school and Woodall Street, you're basically on that same railroad right of way. So through that area, you're not raising it at all.
So, Mr. Terry, are you saying this would lessen the impact of the freight rail service through St. Louis Park? This is the M&S North.
That was our goal, yes. Lessen the impact as opposed to some of the other options that we looked at and studied, yes. And a lot of that was directly related to what we heard in the town hall meetings. Some of those suggestions came from those people at the meetings.
But you had no problem with the Kenilworth corridor staying as the rail route?
It works today, sir. Looking at it just from the railroad perspective. I wasn't looking at it from the light rail perspective or the tunnels or any of that. Just looking at it from the freight rail, it works today. Needs some improvements, needs some upgrades, that type of thing, to long term to handle the traffic. But yeah, it works today.
Now, you said you didn't know what the cost of the M&S North Transit System concept is, but here in this, there's like a PowerPoint, it says 105 million without property. So what's that money for?
That is my estimate of what I think it would cost to build the proposal that we put out. Again, it does not have the property takes involved in it. It also doesn't have some of the other projects that may be done along with it. Example, there was a storm sewer that somebody wanted to lower underneath the Highway 7 access. I don't have any money in there for that. This is just basically the railroad related kind of piece of the puzzle that will turn over to the experts here at Met Council, and they'll put the rest of the puzzle together, so to speak.
And how much property would need to be taken through eminent domain or other means?
I have estimated from 5 to 7 homes might be affected, and there are about the same number of businesses that might be affected.
So it's a pretty small number of actual private property that.
In depending, obviously, if you're one of the people that has a home, it's the biggest thing you've ever heard of. But on a project this size, that's probably a fair description.
Does this also eliminate the issue with the railroad was saying they had an issue not just with the grade change, but also the S curve in the track design?
Just in non-engineered language, what you got to do with the S curves is basically put straight track between them. If you have your little model railroad set, you can only go around so many curves. Basically, you need to be able to straighten out the cars on the train as they go through the curves. There are reverse curves all over the United States, but it's the tangent that's really the driving factor on some of these curves. Some of the projects had 8-degree curves. We were able to eliminate those. But the key to this thing was we were able to put more straight track between the curves. Yes, the middle curve, we reduced its length quite dramatically.
Did you talk to the railroad itself about this, and do they seem to think this is viable?
I have talked to the railroad. They, probably 10 days ago, they had some suggestions and comments. The Canadian Pacific Railroad owns the property. I think they're satisfied if the Twin City Western is satisfied. Twin City Western, I sent them the kind of the revised plan last Wednesday, Thursday, and I have not heard back from them since, and I'm sure they're having their experts take a look at it.
As far as you know, those railroads will be okay with either Kenilworth or that one?
I would think the Twin City and Western operates today on the Kenilworth. I don't want to speak for them, but I cannot give you a reason that they wouldn't be okay with it. And as far as the other one, they're looking at it now, the M&S North, to see if we need to tweak some things or if it's acceptable to them as is. Continue the process.
Jim, the city of Minneapolis criticized the previous plan, saying that the railroad was asking too much. Former Mayor Artur Ryback called it a Cadillac plan. Was it over-engineered, in your opinion?
Not to speak ill of anybody else, I just wish Trans Systems has been working on this project all along, and I'll leave it at that. By the way, I drive a Cadillac.
All right. Okay, we have time for just about a couple more questions. Or are there other elected officials here you may want to talk to? So.
Going into this, before the moratorium, Met Council was proceeding along with a proposal that would have the shallow tunnels and so forth. Has any of the studies done and that are being released today changed your feeling about what option might be more preferable, or whether it's
Well, I feel like everybody else. I'm here to get the input from the communities, get the input from the citizens, look at this report. I think this is new information today, and I need to take the time to take a look at it.
And so is March, go
Can
ahead.
you step up for a second here? And, you know,
Go
your
ahead.
recommendations on it seems like, just reading them in a cursory manner, you're talking about more study, more, is that what you're recommending here? Or are you talking about changes that you think would be necessary, assuming those tunnels went in?
I guess answering your question, I'm thinking you're talking about the piezometer readings, additional piezometers. So I'll have Jeff come up, because he's a hydrogeologist on the project. With the way it looks, we have to get more data in order to characterize the groundwater flow. But if you could talk to that.
You know, part of our study was to evaluate what the tunnel's effect would be on groundwater flow, on water levels. In order to do that, you need to know where the groundwater is flowing. The available data that we have right now, you can't tell what that is. However, there's the aquifer underlying it transmits a lot of water, so we would not expect there to be a problem because water should be able to flow underneath it without an issue. That being said, the additional studies needed to make sure that that's correct.
So at this point, are you saying you don't know yet if the water quality of those lakes would be okay with tunnels?
I was just talking about the water levels, not the water quality. That'll take monitoring from the re-infiltration chambers, and then also the phase 2 investigation where groundwater samples would be collected and analyzed to see if there's existing contamination in the corridor.
So your study doesn't really talk about the quality of the water?
Yes, it addresses that. And lays out suggestions for what needs to be done to study it. The monitoring program that was put together is really very preliminary, so it's lacking specifics. We need to do the additional investigation so you can define those specifics.
Okay, I just need to take one more question here so we can get going. There's a lot of content and a lot of detail on the website, and I really encourage you to look at it for more detail about the water study and the freight rail study.
I could just ask one follow-up on water
Sure.
quality. I mean, you're talking about unknowns. How certain can we be before constructing the tunnels about the impact on water quality, and how much will just be, you know, an open question until it's built and until we see how it interacts with the lakes?
Well, there's different levels of analysis that you do at different levels of engineering, and so I think what the consultants are recommending is that we continue on the path that we are. We continue to do what we would do normally as we go into full engineering, and that would be appropriate for any construction project of this size and scope.
And so you're saying by March we essentially have two routes now again, Minneapolis and St. Louis Park again, and by March we'll have narrowed it back down to one again?
That would be the goal.
Okay.
And I think that's really what we're trying to get to, because, you know, we really want to build this project. The Southwest LRT project is the extension of the Green Line. The Green Line is going to open June 14th, and I think we are really going to have to make some tough choices and make a choice to set the project budget and scope with the input from the citizens and the communities, and we'll keep working with people so we can get to a point, we think, where we get a solution that's really good and acceptable for everyone here. All right, thank you
all.
very
There are copies
much.
of the documents back there if you didn't get